o'clock. You all, just looking at you, just look to be the finest students in the whole area of Pitt County here with such rigorous in academic credentials and all of the desires to learn and to grow. This is going to be something kind of fun. I think you're going to like it. And we will be talking today about our Read Through the Bible program, which is taking us forward all the way through the book of Leviticus this week into the book of Numbers. Good morning. How you doing? So we're going to get started with kind of the way things looked. Because when you read the first 6 chapters of Numbers, what you really find is a lot of boring things. Seriously. Mostly because they're not organized, they're just written down for you, and it tells about the order of the tribes and the census. You may recall that one of the things that I said I thought was true was that there were between the ages of 20 and 60, which would be the military age, there were 603,550 men who were eligible to fight. You remember that? So they had 603,550 plus they had 22,732, if I remember right, who were of the tribe of Levi. So this was their strength force. Now, 603,550 from all of the tribes. This was Levi. Levi did not provide, but they did have a number of 732 that they did not have to, that were in excess of the firstborn in the 603,550. So they had to actually redeem these. It was just a matter of offering an animal. So the count was really important. So this is how the book of Numbers starts out. They had a census, and they had the census so that they could learn what? What were they wanting to learn primarily?
Who was in each clan?
Who was in each clan, and they wanted to learn their strength, how many people they had who could fight, how many people they had in the service. Because the fighting ages was from 20 to 60. And between 50 and 60, they would usually not let them do anything then except just a few things. But for the service of the court, it was from 30 to 50. So they had to know how many people they had that they could serve, how many people they had to have who could fight, and that was two of the biggest things.
So was the 603,550 20 to 60?
603,550 was from the people who could fight. So that was the number of people that they had that were ready to go when they first started their journeys in the wilderness. So you can whenever you're reading these kind of things and you don't know, how to stay involved in such boring stuff, I'll tell you what I do. I take my Bible, just like this. You see, this is what I did. I just come in here and put. I'll have to see if I can put my glasses on to find it. Oh, that's Deuteronomy, okay. No wonder. So I like to use Bibles that have large margins, but if you look, this is just so simple. But all I do is just come by and just put on there. I just write down the summary that there were so many people from Reuben, so many people from Simeon, so many people from Gad. Oh, I'm messing up my Bible, aren't I? So yeah, I put those things in there so that I can just go back and kind of get the summary. I'm sorry about that. Didn't mean to make a mess, but just I'll write it out so that way I can keep up with it. And then it's like these other things. They had the diagram. They tell you which place they were in the camp.
My Bible does that.
It does.
Yeah, mine did too.
Oh, good. Well, those things are really useful to kind of help you to get a picture of what it was like in Numbers. Moses had to do a lot of organizing. We probably don't ever really think about it that much, but you got that many people logistically, you got to keep them moving and keep them active and keep them fed and keep them trained and so forth. So he really was quite the guy. Now, I almost always draw this tabernacle wrong. So I'm going to try to do it right this time. We're going to come up here. This would be the first one. This would be the second one. This would be the third. And this would be this, and this would be this. All right, this would be the east, even though that seems like west to me. But anyway, here's where the grill was, and that's what it was, the brass altar. They had the laver, which was in here. It was a water pot. So they came in here, they grilled the stuff, made the offering. The priest would come in and wash. The curtain was here. They came in, there would be the lampstands, and then there would be the table to show bread. And click, so there's the bread, put the bread on it. Right here would be the incense, making smoke. Back here was the Ark of the Covenant, and with the cherubim on it, and yes, covering it up. This would have been called the mercy seat right here where the blood was sprinkled. Okay, so that's what it looked like. Now, what you find from the rest of this study in the book of Numbers is how God gets them organized. Now, it's just not a real fun thing to do, but it is needed, I think. You've got to at least have an idea that God had a strategy for them, and to know that he had something good in mind, and sure enough, he does. So let me find my book, and I'm going to draw the picture out the way that it's supposed to be, make sure that I get it right. It turns out that the most important thing that they had to do was to put the protectors in around them. So, their protectors, of course, were the people who were the warriors. So I have to come over here on Moses' side. We have Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. So that would be here. Judah, Issachar. I'm trying to write good, and Zebulun. And then you went right down the road to Nightdale. Right after that, and stopped in Raleigh. Now, if you got your notes, one thing that you might want to do is just for fun. Write down how many people were 20 and above in Judah. And let's add up these numbers. Okay? So maybe you can be working on that. So we have these three different tribes. They're all told to get out in front where Moses and Aaron and their sons are. So Moses, Aaron, and sons. They pitched right around here. And that's an important thing because you're going to see something about the camp and how it was a little bit lopsided. So besides that, we have that Moses was on this side. He had Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. And there were a group of people that were Levites who were called the Merarites and Kohathites. And do you all, right off the top, do you remember those names?
Remember, I've heard them.
You have heard them. Well, you remember Merari and Gershon and Kohath. These three names right here were sons of Levi. So they would have been cousins to Moses and Aaron. Okay, so this would have been the inner priestly tribe. Now, you will recall that the assignments that they had, remember when we rode through the book of Leviticus, the boring stuff that we just got through was a whole lot of everybody learning who's going to take what and move what when they have to tear it down and put it back up. So the Kohathites, they had to carry everything. They didn't have anything that they could put on a shelter or a trailer or a cart. Everything that they carried by hand. The Merarites could break down the tent poles and all of that stuff and put it down, and they could transport some of that. But all of them had jobs, okay, that they had to do to move the tabernacle. Not these people. These people had a job that was a different kind of job. What was it that they were out there doing? They were running interference. They were protecting them. Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. Benjamin. On this side, and down here we have Gad, Simeon, and Reuben. Reuben had to be on the outside because he had to go get sandwiches quite often. And to send him on out right quick. So this is kind of what the camp looked like. Now, again, the point here is, if you go back and do the arithmetic, what you'll find is that God had them protected. In other words, He had the strength in the way that they moved. They were covered adequately. They had plenty of people. They had God was in the midst of them. Their tents were all around everywhere. They had tents scattered all through here. So it was obvious that when they came in at night, there were a couple of things that happened. One was, according to the book of Numbers, a big light would come and the glory of God would just settle upon this and would light up the camp. It was in last night's reading or yesterday's reading. I don't know if you all saw that or not. Are you all caught up? Yes. Caught up? Okay.
The numbers, I got 108,100 on the Benjamin, Ephraim, Manasseh end, and that's a lot less than the other ones.
Yeah, right. And it makes me wonder if that's because that was like the back when they traveled. They would have been the
186,000 on the front end.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to look at it. So I ran across, let me see, something here in chapter 10 of Numbers. If y'all could find chapter 10. Let's see.
Silver trumpet.
Oh yeah, chapter 9. This is verse 15, chapter 9, verse 15. On the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant, from evening until morning. It was over the tabernacle, having the appearance of fire. It was always so. The cloud covered it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. Whenever the cloud lifted from over the tent, the Israelites would set out. So what was it then how was it that they were to know when to go based upon that.
When the cloud lifted.
They knew it was time to go. There was no arguments. So if the cloud was there, they didn't have any plans to do anything. They stayed until, and they stayed for a right good while. But if the cloud began to move and to lift, then they knew that they were free to go. Now, of course, this is a good picture of what it is to be led by the Holy Spirit. The Bible says to be led by the Spirit of Christ, that is an indication that we're followers of Christ. And that means that, we have to learn how to be sensitive to, like when the Holy Spirit is moving here, we're trying to follow and go where He leads us. So that's how they organized their camp. That's how they got everything done. But as they get into the actual next part, boy, it starts off just from the very beginning. They're all organized, but man, they start running all into each other, don't they? Everything goes bad, seriously. Chapter 11. So everybody go to chapter 11. We'll start talking about some of the things that happened. Now they made everything right. They got their stuff together, but as soon as it's time for them to go to chapter 11, the first few words, now when the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, the Lord heard it, and His anger was kindled. So of all of the things that they have now, they are prepared for all of their enemies. They are really becoming an elite force. They know what to do. They know how to act and how to respond to threats. They've already had one, which, by the way, this would be good for you to know, in Exodus chapter 17. In Exodus 17, there was an attack on the backside from a group called the Amalekites. And they attacked Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And they really got the stragglers. These were the people who didn't move, and they killed them, and they took them slaves. And it caused a big battle. God got very upset. So they had a vulnerable area, and it was here. And it was exposed from the very time that they arrived at Mount Sinai in Exodus 17, 18, and 19. So these three different tribes already had a little bit of testing because of the Amalekites coming, and they found that they weren't quite prepared militarily. So they started getting ready to be able to travel through the wilderness. Especially, they were planning to go into the land of Canaan. So what happens is we begin to read the story. We pick it up, and we go to Numbers 13, and we begin to think, well, here we are. We're all organized. We're all ready to go. But the first thing that you find is murmuring and complaining. And this is like such a sign that things aren't going to be good. Whenever people are whining and complaining, it is almost always going to lead to some really not so good things. So that's in chapter 11, Numbers 11, not 13. All right, so there's the complaining. And they're complaining about a lot of things. It looks like that they're complaining about the fact that they're not moving, they're not getting anywhere, that they're upset because they used to eat meat in Egypt and now they don't have anything but white bread. And so they're just grumbling about all of these things. And then there's this heavy burden on Moses. So Moses gets a little bit, is overwhelmed. And then God helps to get him situated by giving him 70 elders. Then in chapter 12, we're still reading, they start complaining about meat, they're hungry. And then that's when God sends in the quails.
There's a verse that I really liked. It said, now Moses was a very humble man, and more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. even in all of this he was going through.
I know.
Can you imagine?
I know. This is true. I read that too, and I thought, what an admirable man he must have been, seriously, to have had that kind of an attitude despite all of the stuff that he was experiencing. I wrote in my notes, so a third manifestation of man's insensibilities and insensitivities is jealousy and murmuring regarding others' relationships. So when you get to chapter 12, one of the things that Moses goes through, not only is he overwhelmed, but Moses is singled out by his sister and brother. They give him a hard time because he married a Cushite woman. There used to be, that was the thing when a long time ago, when I was a kid, they said that Moses married a black woman and that God didn't like that. And that's really not what that means at all. It's the Cushite woman is a woman who probably was outside of their culture. She probably was not as interactive in the Jewish culture because she was not from the Jewish culture, but she was converting to Judaism. I think Miriam just didn't like her and probably said something, and God said, I'm not going to put up with that. In this passage, you find God said, why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? I'm going to teach you to be afraid. You better not speak against my people like that. He took up for Moses. And so he took up for this woman. We do not know anything about the Cushing woman except that she was just probably married from out of the culture, and it probably bothered. If you all learn anything else, please let me know. But it bothered Miriam. She just didn't like it. She wasn't blood. She wasn't Pasana. You know what I mean? So that created a problem for Moses. So they're dealing with hunger, they're dealing with complaints, they're dealing with finding fault with Moses' family and arguing about that. And then after all of this stuff, just the strangest thing in chapter 13, why that would be what you would think would be, okay, well then, let's just move forward. That's when they sent the spies in to Canaan, and they came back, and not good. It's hard to really downplay the significance of this particular moment, because this is going to set the course for the Jewish people for the next 40 years. It is going to cost them. Now, I want to ask y'all, did you all read this yet? Did you read this story yet of the 40 years and the 40 days that they were there and all of that? You read it yet, Mac? Are y'all caught up there yet? Don't be ashamed if you have. Lou, you read it? You got there yet? Have you got
No.
that? Carolyn, you got that far?
Yes, I'm up to date.
Okay.
Well, wait a minute, so am I, where my sticker is.
Well,
So that would be before, or?
yeah, I think we should
It
be
is.
today. If you read today, you should be up to like Numbers
Numbers 23.
15, 23 or something.
It is 23.
So here's what I wanted to say. As you know, in Numbers 13, they send out these spies and they stay in the land for 40 days. While they are there, they are seeing the fruit of the land, they're seeing the benefits of the land, but they're overwhelmed by the Anakim, by the giants that are there. And they are feeling very, underable. And instead of looking with eyes of faith that God wants them to have it, that He's going to drive them out, they begin to try to think and imagine it's going to all depend upon them. They don't have God. And they begin to murmur and say they can't do it. And what they do is they just get absolutely terrified. and they haven't even fought their first battle yet. So their first battle is a battle that's going on in the mind, and they lose. And that battle cost them 40 years and 603,550 fighting men who just wandered around in the wilderness. Not good. So this happened at a place called Kadesh Barnea, K-A-D-S. This is one of the important Kadesh Barnea, and it is well known in all of the Jewish history books as being the place where they really failed. So as you get to that, things definitely change after they get through with their encounter at Kadesh Barnea. They actually begin to go downhill, and then it's a lot more struggles as you get into the other parts of the book of Numbers. For example, I want to show you just how all of these things begin to kind of go away, or how they begin to change. So in chapter 13, they try to go back and fight, which they lose. Chapter 14, there is a rebellion, and the people are trying to rebel against Moses and Aaron and so forth. And Moses is having to pray for God not to kill them all. Then there was an invasion that was turned back, which was in the latter part of chapter 14. Then, let's see, we've got another big division that happens with a man by the name of Korah, Dathan, and Aram. And a couple of things that we're going to talk about that this morning. There are some of the divisions that happen in the Bible, some of the fights that happen in the Bible that we just wonder why they're even there. They just seem like they just are not that big a deal. But the one with Korah is different. The one with Korah has got some really big implications that carry over into the New Testament. Korah's name is mentioned in Jude and in 2 Peter. He has a long shadow. He was the leader here. If you've read in chapter 16 about Korah, Korah was a man with ambition and dissatisfaction. He was behind this rebellion. Plus, he had a lot of pride. He had a lot of independence, a lot of presumption, a lot of aggression. If you read these things, you'll find those were pretty characteristic of him. And he was pretty bold. So he had a really strong conversation. Moses' response in verse 15, Moses was very angry. And he said to the Lord, pay no attention to their offering. This is not good. So the Lord spoke to Moses and told them to separate themselves. God was about to consume them in a moment. They fell on their faces and said, oh God, the spirit of all flesh, shall one person sin, and you become angry with the whole congregation. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, say to the congregation, get away from the dwellings of Korah. Now this is when God created the division into the ground, and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed them up along with their household, everyone who belonged to Korah and all their goods. So God took care of them. But you know, this is not a good way to start off a trip, is it? You know, it's like if they had started off, we're going to the promised land, we're going to the promised land, they might would have been better off, but boy, they started out whining about all of the things they didn't have and the things that they didn't want to do, and then they started a really big argument, and then some of them died. Oh, it was just bad. And then they said they couldn't go, and that turned out bad. So when you get over to the middle of the book, you've already kind of felt a turn, and Numbers is really not a very happy book. So you get into this, and then it becomes a matter of picking up the good stories, the good Bible stories that some of you will remember. For example, the budding of Aaron's rod is in chapter 17, and about that, This was a miracle that did two things. It was a picture of the resurrection, because the stick was completely dead. The stick was put inside of the dark place and left there for overnight, and the stick came alive and had buds on it. So it was a picture of that. But also remember that Korah was the one who was saying that he was going to be the priestly tribe, who was Moses and Aaron, that they would have that duty. Well, God said, I'll show you the one that I've chosen. And so he took Aaron's rod, and that night as it lay in the tabernacle, it began to blossom with little almond blossoms and almond fruit on it. So they knew that that dead stick had come alive that night. That was a picture of Jesus' resurrection, as I said. So this was a good story that is in the midst of a lot of bad other things. This is what's God doing that. You have in chapter 19, you have the story of the red heifer. In case you're not familiar with the red heifer, the red heifer is a very strong indication of a prophetic ministry. There have been no red heifers of late until within the last 50 years for the Jewish people to actually sacrifice. Now the red heifer has begun to make a comeback, and people are saying there's something very prophetic about it. I don't know. I know that it is happening. But there is chapter 19 that tells us about the red heifer and how that is supposed to be handled, and how that God is going to use it, hopefully, to help to hasten the day when the Jews are going to be brought back into a right relationship with the Lord. They had some trouble in chapter 20 with Meribah, which of course that was the waters, and this is where Moses was supposed to speak to the rock, and he didn't. He hid it again, and that's where things messed up with Moses. Now again, I don't want to be negative, but I just want you to look at all of the stuff that I've been putting up here, and Moses was one of them. Moses was really getting picked on in this time. Moses, first of all, in that 13th chapter, he had people that were complaining against him, just generally speaking. But the second thing Moses had going for him, after that he had these people who didn't want to proceed and go into the land. They brought back a bad report. He has been having to pray for them and asking God to keep them from being destroyed. He's got all of these issues going on with leadership, with Korah and all of them. And then Moses, in this time of weakness, Moses messes up himself. In other words, he really was at a very vulnerable time. And so Moses blew it. And he didn't get into the promised land because of it. A very harsh treatment, according to some people. But nonetheless, God is God, and he does what is pleasing to himself. And so we don't underestimate what he does. But there's another thing that happened. If you'll look right after this took place, he's had Miriam, who's been giving him a hard time, and now Aaron dies. So Miriam is giving him a hard time. Aaron dies. We are going to throw away some of these things today. Aaron dies. Moses blew it. Miriam. And so Moses' immediate family is being definitely attacked during this time. And so as Aaron dies, of course that's very moving. That's when they had a plague to break out among them about the brass snake. Do y'all remember that story? That's the one where Moses made a snake and held it up so people could look at it and would not be tortured by the stings of the bites of the serpent anymore. Yeah, I can imagine, with all of these snakes or serpents going around, and somebody comes and says, "Moses, what are you doing?" And he says, "I'm making a snake." Don't you think that's the last thing we need right now? So, I mean, that's what we got. We got snakes everywhere. Maybe we need something to kill the snakes. Why are you making a snake?
Did they eventually worship that? Seems
did.
like Hezekiah actually destroyed that
That's right.
staff. I think it was him.
That was so good. It was called Nehushtan. They called it Nehushtan because it had become like an idol in the days of Hezekiah. It was something that was used for good in that time, and now it was something that was being used as an idol, and they tore it up. All right, so this is kind of the way things are unfolding here in your reading. I like the story. When you get to chapter 22, I do think I want to help you to be prepared because you're going to be getting to the book of Deuteronomy. So let me tell you what you should be careful with. When you get to chapter 22 and 23, the story is there of Balaam. Balaam and Korah are the big two bad boys in this book. Balaam is a prophet, and he's a kind of conniving, sneaky prophet because he's open to the best bidder. He'll kind of give a blessing to people who grease his palms. So he's got some people that want him to put a curse on Israel. And he's willing to do it. He wants to do it. He says, "Yeah, I'll go do that. If you pay me the right amount of money, I'll curse them." And so he makes an effort to do so, and every time he goes to do it, it turns out to be he blesses him. God just wouldn't let him do it, so he starts to speak blessing. So these Amorites are upset with him because he's not doing it. And so he says, "I'll tell you, we don't have to get me to speak blessings or curses. We can get God to speak blessings or curses. So here's what we're going to do. We've got a new plan. Instead of me standing up here speaking curses over them, let's send some of those pretty ladies in there to visit with them a few nights into their camp. Then God will take care of cursing them." So they just made a plan, sent in the women, started intermingling with the men, turned into a mess. Then God spoke, and so Balaam led the people into sin. So this is known as Balaam's error. Balaam was the guy who let the gate down so that the enemy could come in, but not to kill, but to fraternize. So Balaam was a bad guy, and he's talked about pretty bad in the book of, even in the book of Revelation. I think he is mentioned. He's hated. It's always spoken of in a negative way. Balaam is also the story where the donkey talks, in case you didn't know that. You get a little bit of Balaam's story in 3 or 4 different sections here. Let's skip on down to the latter part of the book. When you start getting into chapter 27 and 28, you get into more of the just day-by-day operational things. So this is not hard reading. It is kind of like you just have to push through. I want to prepare you a little bit. When you get to...
It says chapter 26, the second census. They did another census.
Yep, they sure are. There is a census right there. I've got it written down, census of a new generation. So they already started counting them right there. come down to chapter 32 for just a minute. There is an important thing that happens in chapter 32 that I think you should pay attention to when you get to it. There is, as they've been moving through the land, they come to what we call the east side of the Jordan. There was a man there named Og, who Og was his name, and he sold boots for girls. Just kidding. No, that was Ugg. Just kidding. That was Ugg. They were kin, though, I think. You know what I mean? But Og and Sihon were the two kings. So I'm just going to draw you just a little picture. So, you know, the whole idea of Israel is sort of like a little bean. It's kind of like that. That's the way it looks. So they came up into the wilderness from this side. They would have been on the east side. And Og had a stronghold here, and Sihon had a stronghold here. So Israel, when they were doing the 40 years in the wilderness, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh said, look, we really like it here. So we want you to give us this section of land. Okay? And so Moses agreed to it. But it was very important, the stipulations that he put with it in Numbers 32. He said the first thing is, now, we're going to give you this land, which is fine. But when we go into this land right here and we start claiming it for our own, colonizing it, you can't stay back here in your land because you've already, got you a place. You're going to have to come and help us. And if you don't come and help us, you will have sinned against the Lord. And that's where he says, be sure your sin will find you out. I don't know if you remember that. But that happened in this context. What he's saying is, you need to come over and help your brothers and help them to win. So the strategy that Joshua had later on was to divide the country. He went in on a military campaign and divided them out, and then he sent the 12 tribes in the different areas and told them where their properties were going to be, and then they were to finish colonizing it. That was the way it was supposed to work. They kept this territory, so they had the land here and the land south of there. Reuben and Gad and half a tribe of Manasseh had that little section. So that's what Numbers 32 is all about. You should read that because it does remind you that this was a very tense moment. For example, in Numbers 32, I think it's verse 8, Moses says to the people, shall your brethren go to war, and shall you sit here? You're going to sit here while your brothers go to war? What's wrong with you? So there were some tense conversations because the people were not engaging to the level that Moses thought they should. So chapter 34 is when you start getting into the boundaries. Now let me talk to you about the boundaries. Everybody knows that this is not easy reading. But what you get to is you're going to get to so-and-so is going to have that piece of property, so-and-so is going to have that piece of property, and it's going to go to the river, and this is going to stop here and all of that. So you're going to find that that section is really not an easy read. So the best thing for you to do is just kind of skip through it, just read over it and pay attention to it, but you're not trying to read now for details that much. Just kind of look at it and keep up with it, but don't get bogged down there. What I would look for is that inside of this place right here, God does have 8 cities of refuge. Now, these are very important because God says we're going to make a place here for people who, if there's an accident or an incident, that they can run and be safe and not be hurt. So these 8 cities were located throughout the region, and so as they were put in places that were easy for them to find. So a couple of things that I wanted to point out about them. Number one, if you can get a Bible dictionary, the names of those cities are kind of helpful. Like, for example, I'm going to call it interesting, because it's like one of them is shoulder. So you run to the shoulder. In other words, you come into the shoulder, or you come to the open arms. See, these were the names of the cities, and so they were named such so that the people could go there and they would find refuge. So there were always elders at the gates of the cities of refuge, and a person could come and knock on the door, and they could gain entrance, and then they would have to prove their case, or either they'd be put back out. But they were given a safe entrance. They were given relief from the immediate attack of an avenger. This would have been a case like if I had hurt somebody out on the road by not being careful. Let's just say I backed over somebody and somebody saw me do it, and they were really mad, and I thought they're going to kill me. So I would run to the city of refuge, knock on the door, they'd let me in, and then I'd have to tell what I did, and then they'd have to figure out what they were going to do with me, but I would be safe as long as I was in there. So that was kind of the way the cities of refuge were. There were 8 of them, so that people could go there and be okay. The cities of refuge were very important in the time for people, but later on, for example, when we get to the study of David, you're going to find that one of David's generals ran into the city of refuge, and Joab went in and got it because he was going to kill him. So the city of refuge didn't matter to him. He just went on in, pulled him out, and killed him. So he did protect him most of the time. So does everybody understand where we are with that? All right. Then let's go over to the book of Mark, because you should be in the book of Mark too. We have, let's see, what time is it? About 10 minutes. You should be up to about midway in the book of Mark, and I didn't get to talk to you about that, so I want to prepare you a little bit for what you're going to be reading there. The difference between Matthew and Mark is really amazing. Matthew is classic. He classifies things. He puts things in groups. He's very logical in the way that he writes. Mark is written with Peter being the main spokesperson, and he has told this story to John Mark, and John Mark is writing it down, and Peter is talking really fast. So when you get to the book of Mark, what you're going to find mostly is that everything goes really quick, and he tells the story and gets you right on into it real fast. Now, for example, if you've kept up with your reading, you would have noticed already that in 2 chapters, Mark has already covered more territory than Matthew covered in 15 chapters. So he's going very quick. So it took Matthew 15 chapters to get to it. Mark gets to it in 2 chapters. One of the big words that's in there, and you should probably just pay attention, the word immediately, or the word quickly, or suddenly, or any of those things, quickly, suddenly. All of those words are words that are action words, but it means that Peter, who was telling the story to John Mark, was telling that immediately Jesus went here and he quickly healed this person. He was a man of action. One of the things that's important in the book of Mark is that it is written for a Roman audience. And the Romans, the soldiers especially, wanted to know what he did. So it's a book that talks a lot about what Jesus did. It gives an explanation of all of the things that were related to Jewish customs, so that the reader would be able to understand it. He breaks down some of the things that the other ones do not. He talks a little bit about how Jesus seemed to have no fear, which would have been something the Romans would have been quite amazed at. that he had this, and it talks a lot about his Jesus's confrontations with them. The Romans would have wanted to know how he handled himself under pressure. And so Jesus is the perfect man, and he's handling himself in all of these cases with a lot of poise and character. And so when you get to the stories of Jesus in Mark, you're going to find him being challenged a lot. You're going to find him getting a lot of activity, moving and doing a lot, healing a lot of people, and so forth. Mark is a book that is divided up into two parts. I want to go ahead and tell you that, and the division line for Mark is in chapter 10. Once you understand this, you can see how this book is operated. In Mark chapter 10, when you come down to, let me find it. He said, it's okay, 45. 10:45. That's the dividing line. Up into the first part of that, the first part is that he is the king who serves. Now, on the last part of it, he is the king who saves. Now, let me explain the difference here. You'll see this as you're going through the Gospel of Mark. All the way up into Mark 10:45, Jesus at this point says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Okay? And to give his life a ransom for many. So the whole first part of the book of Mark is divided out with him being the king who's going about showing his willingness to serve, how he's just one time after another, just caring for people, looking after people. In Mark chapter 10:45, they come into Jerusalem, and he gives them this, but the Son of Man came to offer his life as a ransom for many. And so beginning at that point, that's when you start the journey to the cross. So that is the way the book is divided out. And it tells in this part what he did. This tells how he suffered. So once you get to that Mark 10:45, you'll recognize that as being a very important transitional area. So Mark's intent is to show Jesus' courage, his quickness to respond. He was a man's man. He was able to push through all of the opposition and the struggles, and to present himself as I said, as a man's man. He did come to die, and he did come to save, and he did carry out his mission very well, and so that's the gist of the book of Mark. Mark is 16 chapters long. Most people believe that Mark was the first book of the Gospels written. I think it probably was too. So other people used some of Mark's material, like Luke used it, and Matthew probably used it and expanded on it with some research. But it's an eyewitness account because Peter was with the Lord a lot, and he helped John to be able to write it all down, put it all together. What happens, though, is that you don't get as much of the red letter part in Mark. You get the red letter reading in John. That's where he talks more, so you kind of hear his voice a lot more there. Other than that, these stories that Jesus is involved in are things you should be pretty familiar with. There are a little bit of differences in the way they're told, but all in all, what's in Matthew is typically in Mark. Any questions? Think you got it? Who knows?
It's coming.
It's coming. Well, I do think it helps you to get ready. if you know what you're looking at. And I, for me personally, am finding the reading of the New Testament to be so easy. It's just, for me, just a couple of chapters, and I mean, do that at the end of the day, and it just stands right by itself. The Old Testament's a little bit different because you're having to slog through a larger part. But it's not been too much of a chore.
Not for you, because you are so good.
I am so fast reader. Joyce says I'm a fast reader.
Did you compile all of this, or did you have a guide?
I did that.
It's really good.
Thank you.
It is.
I worked hard on that. I know.
In your next career, are you gonna be, you know, a professor in, seminary?
You should think so. Yes, sir, that's me. I would love to teach. I did enjoy teaching. I taught at a school one time. It was fun. But I like what I'm doing here better.
We like having you here.
Well, I want to keep it that way. Dear Lord, please bless Carolyn and bless Mac and Kay. I pray you bless Lou and Liz. Bless Josh and Justin. Bless me. We need you today as we want to serve you and to do it well. God, help us to have grace. These things we're trying to learn, we know we can't do it without you, so please help us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right.
Here we go.